Tell me a little bit about what happened here and where we go toward this June meeting.
Well, I think there's a few strings to try and extract out of the decision, or the lack of one last night. I mean, there's a local thread, there's a kind of a regional thread, and then there's probably a global markets issue. And take it on a local level. Clearly, Qatar was really keen to host this meeting, to bring all of the nations of the oil world together for a successful, join hands together path forward. They were as startled as everybody else that this meeting essentially imploded. They were of the view, even as early as yesterday morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, as we all gathered here, that this was going to be a 1 hour, 2 hour, dot the I's, cross the T's, and everything would be done. So there'll be a lot of egg on the face here today in Qatar, somewhat, I think, embarrassment and potentially some strains put into the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because nobody likes to be embarrassed on a global stage. And I think there was a bit of that on a local level. Secondly, of course, this was about supporting oil prices, and there are countries that are currently experiencing some real struggle with the lower oil price, and we're seeing today Kuwait, for example, a major strike happening at the national oil company because of cutbacks of subsidies and benefits to the oil workers in Kuwait. And we're seeing as a result over 1.5 million barrels of oil a day knocked out there. Kuwait would certainly like a few extra dollars on the barrel in order to support and tackle what could become a significant strike. So there's a number of local issues that are to play out, where the threads go on a local regional issue. I think globally, or sort of within the wider oil community, I doubt we're going to see another oil producers conference reconvened. I think the non-OPEC members or non-OPEC producers will retrench to their community of basically staying away from OPEC. OPEC will trench back into their box and plan for their June meeting. On a global level, it's obviously negative for oil prices, but I don't think really too dramatically negative. I think after the initial shock of the failure of the talks, prices will rebound based on the fundamentals.
Which is essentially what the Qatari minister was saying to me last night as well. Now, I have to talk to you about Saudi Arabia, because a week from today, the Deputy Crown Prince, the man who's basically he's gotten the blame pinned on him for what happened here in Doha in terms of the Saudi stance. How dangerous is this policy for that country?
Well, I think they've been it's interesting in a way. We've all been sort of coexisting in two realities. Both Saudi Arabia and Iran have been saying for weeks now that they would not do anything. Saudi was saying we won't do anything without Iran participating, and Iran was always saying we're not going to participate. It was kind of like being sort of pushed upon Iran that they should participate in this agreement. And so somehow we all arrived in Doha thinking that this parallel universe had found harmony, when clearly it hadn't. So nothing, I think, has fundamentally changed there, except it's been a lot more pronounced. I do think that Saudi Arabia gave strong signals to their oil producing colleagues that they weren't going to make the Iran issue, if you like, a deal breaker. And I think that was the shock to everybody on arrival here, that the Iran non-participation had indeed become a deal breaker. If Russia and everybody else had known that beforehand, I don't think they would have spent a day traveling around the world to come to Doha. So for Saudi Arabia, one has to question. Somebody said to me this morning, maybe Saudi Arabia doesn't want oil prices to recover that fast, and this was essentially a self-sabotage to sort of soften prices so that the shale oil producers, who had essentially been started to signal that they were gathering on the sidelines to come back in, may take a step back. So who knows? There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
Sean, where do we go from here? What happens in June?
I think OPEC remains to be essentially on the sidelines. I think it's essentially back to every country for themselves. Now, whether Saudi Arabia will follow through with what seemed to be somewhat of a threat on Friday, that they could add an extra 1 million barrels to the market, I'm not sure why they would do that, because demand clearly is not there for an extra 1 million barrels of oil supply. Not unless the Kuwait strike turns out to be a significant event, but it's too early to say that would be the case. So I think from here we go back to everybody for themselves. OPEC meeting will come and go, because inevitably Iran and Saudi Arabia remain the two biggest players in OPEC. They're not going to agree between now and then. So I think it's probably soft on oil prices. Don't expect any global strategy, and we'll see where we are at the end of the summer.